This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. I have to admit, as I was prepping for today's show, I toggled over to Facebook, which is a bad habit, I know. But in my Facebook feed, I saw a post from a woman whose iPhone screen had cracked, and she asked, should I take it to the Apple store or repair it somewhere else? Now, I'm betting this has happened to you at some point. When it happened to me, I opted for the Apple store, and it wasn't cheap to replace. But how many of us think about fixing things ourselves or know of an alternative repair shop that could fix it? That's a question our intern Kevin Morrison posed to people recently at West Hartford Town Center earlier this week.
Judy Lederer. I've lived in West Hartford for a long time. If it's a car, I'm going to get it fixed within reason. If it's something smaller that is going to be obsolete soon, I'll consider replacing it.
Mike, New Haven. If I can fix it myself, I'll do it, but if it's more expensive, then I'll just replace it.
My name is Seishu Badrinath, Avon, Connecticut. I think it comes down to the usability of the item. I mean, if it's a vacuum cleaner, we use it all the time, and we need it. We'll have to weigh the cost of repairing it to buying something new and more advanced.
Sue, Ewington. I look at YouTube, and if I can fix it myself, I'll give it a try. But if it takes too much time, I'll get a professional.
R.J. Roy, Windsor, Connecticut. I am one that uses it until it completely dies. I will fix it and duct tape it, and until it explodes, I will fix it.
Once again, those are voices on the street gathered by our intern, Kevin Morrison. Today, Where We Live, we're going to learn about the right to repair movement. Coming up, we'll talk to a Connecticut business owner about the challenges she runs into when trying to repair smartphones. You think it's easy as ordering a replacement part? Think again. We'll also learn how right to repair laws in places like Massachusetts allow independent repair shops access to basic diagnostic information from car manufacturers. But as technology takes over our cars more and more, will independent mechanics be left in the dark or forced to spend more money to purchase the proprietary software so they can fix your car? We're going to talk all about that just ahead. First, joining me now from a studio at WBUR in Boston is Leah Chan Greenwald, who's Associate Dean and Professor of Law at Suffolk University's School of Law. That's in Boston, where she specializes in intellectual property law. Leah, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk more about this right to repair movement later on, but we wanted to start out with this idea of intellectual property. When we hear that, can you tell us what that means?
Yeah, it's been in the news more recently, and so hopefully listeners aren't as unfamiliar with it as maybe they would have been, a number of years ago. But intellectual property really refers to all of those intangible, ideas, inventions, creative thoughts that you have down on a paper or you record. It could be a photograph, it could be a song, it can be, the Apple phone, is all covered in intellectual property. It could be a trade secret, like Coca-Cola's secret formula is actually a trade secret, and that's considered intellectual property. And it can also be a logo. So the famous Coca-Cola logo, the apple that you take a bite out of, that all of that is intellectual property.
We mentioned intellectual property laws that, again, protect people who are creating and innovating. That's one of the reasons why we purchase particular items or products like an Apple iPhone. But can you talk more about the particular protections that people have through intellectual property laws and how they vary? Many of us have heard of patents and copyrights, and we're just wondering if you could tell us more about those differences.
Yeah, so there are 4 different types of intellectual property law. They're it's divided into different categories. Each has their own particular set of laws. You've got the patent, the copyright, trademark, and trade secret. And each covers a very specific part of what we would consider any given product. And so, I think the Apple iPhone is a great example because it really does actually cover sort of the whole spectrum of intellectual property. So, and the intellectual property laws that protect it. At the basis, I'll go through that, but I think at the basis, intellectual property law does give the intellectual property owner the right to do with it what they want. And what we like to say is it actually gives the right to exclude from others sort of doing with them. So, for example, there was a famous case with the Apple iPhone that they brought against Samsung because they claimed that Samsung had infringed their patents and in the way they Samsung designed their phones and so it's been in the courts. It's still sort of there's some minor things still going on for the last 10 years or more, and so they have patents and the patents protect both the design, the way the iPhone looks, as well as what could be, for example, something that Apple invented that makes it easier internally, for instance, something that we don't even see, to use the iPhone, and that's they could have a utility or usefulness kind of patent. They also have a trademark. So on the back of every iPhone, we see that Apple logo. And all of that allows Apple to prevent others. So the Samsung example, all of those laws allowed then Apple to bring this lawsuit against Samsung and win some hefty damages and to protect their space. And however, on the flip side, though, intellectual property law is supposed to be utilized in sort of a more of a surgical approach, if you will. It is supposed to carve out the space for the owners to be able to exclude others, to innovate and invent, and it's supposed to incentivize that because during the period of time that their intellectual property is protected, they do in fact have a monopoly over their product, and so that's why Apple, had the market for smartphones for so long. Because they were the first to the market, they were the first to invent that. They had the patents over, and every other company like Samsung had to figure out, well, how could we take the idea, because the idea is not protected, how could we take the idea of a smartphone and do it ourselves? And so you have this innovative idea that then is spread across everybody else. But the way that Apple decided to do it should be protected for a limited part of time. And then afterwards, it's sort of this bargain. We give you this, the government gives you this, mini monopoly for a limited part of time, and then you have to you give it up, right? You don't have it any longer, and that's supposed to again incentivize, all the companies to continually be innovating.
That's interesting when you mentioned a period of time, this mini monopoly that the companies have. And I'm curious if you could talk more about some of the other reasons why these types of intellectual property rights are able to expire. Like I was thinking about how we see prescription drugs and then eventually you see generic drugs. Yep. And of course, when that happens, it's better for the consumer because it costs a lot less.
That's correct. Exactly. And so the idea is that, particularly with patents, and so when we're talking about drugs in particular and generic drugs, what allows a generic drug to be put on the market is the patent expiration. And so a patent term, and some of this is constitutionally based. In the United States Constitution, we do have language that does say that it should be protected. Patents and copyright should actually be protected for a limited time, because the idea is that we want to incentivize, but we don't want to ever stop. So just think about the example of the pharmaceutical product. If the patent was never able to expire, we would never have that generic drug to then lower the costs for consumers. On the flip side, then you have, manufacturers sort of strategizing, well, when my patent expires or, when my copyright expires, what then? And so another example of that is Disney. What copyright, is very fraught with controversy, and there's a lot there. But Disney is a good example of with their Steamboat Willie. I don't know if you know that, old black and white image. And that copyright is actually coming up for expiration, I believe, this year, if not next year. And so, looking at how that company is sort of positioning Steamboat Willie and trying to perhaps maybe eventually make a trademark claim, because trademarks is something we haven't spoken about. It's not in the same constitutional clause that patents and copyright are in. And so trademark law is sort of a difference, as well as trade secrets are sort of a different area. And so trademarks can actually be protected in perpetuity as long as they're constantly being used in commerce. So, if Disney, using that example of Steamboat Willie, can make a great claim to a trademark in the image of Steamboat Willie, they could be protecting Steamboat Willie for forever, really.
My guest today is Leah Chan Greenwald, Associate Dean and Professor of Law at Suffolk University in Boston. That's Suffolk University School of Law. As we focus our hour on right to repair, we're going to be learning about that in a few minutes. We wanted to start with a background on intellectual property rights and the differences, the different types, as Leah has mentioned. And so when people think about, Leah, what they purchase and some of the technology that's in their house, talk about how, when we think about repairing things, how those intellectual property rights come into play, because it's not as simple as maybe opening the back of, say, your coffee maker and trying to figure out why it's not making coffee like it used to.
That's right, exactly. I think it might be surprising to the everyday listener to think that there's two things. They may not be able to open up the back of the coffee machine and fix it. And then they may not actually own what they think they own. So the first thing, with the coffee machine, as I was talking about with the all the types of intellectual property rights, so that coffee machine is just covered in intellectual property rights, from patents to copyright, because of the software that's embedded in those coffee machines. So those, the easy to use screen with the programmable features, all of that is software inside. And so, even if you wanted to, even if you were handy and you were able to open up that coffee machine and, have some tools, you may not be able to access the software inside because it's protected by a sort of anti what's the word I'm looking for? The anti-hacking type, so you might actually have to hack into it. So that's sort of another level of skill. And it actually could be illegal, depending on how you're doing it and where you're coming from.
I think there have our listeners, some of them, when they run into, say, if we're going to talk again about Apple products, if a particular Apple product is not working correctly, if you try to do it yourself or have someone look at it, that can then cause issues with Apple even agreeing to continue a warranty or fixing it because you've already interfered with it. Does that also relate to what you're talking about, Leah?
So that's absolutely correct. Okay. But that's a different area. That's sort of consumer protection law. So warranties sort of fall under consumer protection law and contracts. And so, every product we purchase does come with some type of warranty, either, an explicit warranty or something implicit that the law provides for us. And so, that's the domain of the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC. And they have been policing more and more those types of claims. Like if you open up your, console, your gaming console, you will void your warranty, and they have stickers on there. And so the FTC actually just recently sent out, I think last year, letters to these companies like Sony to say that's illegal what you're doing. So just opening up something. So the problem, though, actually, is that you probably couldn't, even if you and I could, in fact, fix our iPhones, the tools available are few and far between, as well as the information. And that's where the IP has come in to allow the Apple to exclude others from that information and just provide it to the authorized dealers. And so that's why when you went into the Apple store, it costs an arm and leg to get your cracked screen fixed when it should only cost maybe $50.
You can join our conversation if you think about as your rights as a consumer and wanting or having an interest to fix things yourselves, because things do cost a lot of money. You can join our conversation, 888-720-9677. Not all of us want to be running to the store or having to purchase new items. This is kind of the thinking behind this right to repair movement. movement that has popped up in recent years. So Leah Chan Greenwald, who is my guest, Associate Dean and Professor of Law at Suffolk University in Boston, could you talk about some of the reasons why this right to repair movement has been growing, specifically in Massachusetts?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to the sense that if we purchase products, ranging from cars to our phones to dishwashers, washer and dryers, large appliances, we should own them and we should have the right to repair them. And, in sort of the New England area, I'd say there's definitely that strong sense of personal autonomy. One of our closest neighbor here is New Hampshire, that they have the live free or die, slogan. So there is that sense. And so I think the outrage that's been experienced in Massachusetts is reflected across the nation, sort of consumers waking up rather slowly, unfortunately, to the fact that, all of these connected and smart devices, while it makes our life easier in the short term, could actually make our life harder and more expensive in the long term.
Coming up, we're going to talk more about this specific right to repair law in Massachusetts that relates to the automotive industry. But we're also thinking about, again, the ability to repair things that we buy, whether it's something that costs $20 or a couple grand. People are also thinking about this. Is it because of their concerns about where this stuff ends up when it no longer works? The landfills that are filling up and the impact on the environment, Leah?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, there's a lot of, concern. I think a lot of competing concerns at issue with the right to repair. A lot of things intersect here. So it's not just the idea of personal autonomy, but it is environmental concern. That some of the nonprofit groups out there have been doing a great job sort of highlighting how many landfills all of our iPhones that we throw away could fill up. And so you actually see the environmental side of it and the environmental concerns pushing the right to repair movement forward in Europe. So Europe has recently released some, directives and some indications. The Commission there has, released this to say that they're going to regulate that manufacturers of large electronics are going to need to make sure that their products last longer and therefore are able to be repaired, which is pretty impressive.
And the ability the products to last longer and ability to be repaired, also making public these repair manuals. So if somebody wants to go to YouTube or do a video of this is how I fixed my coffee maker and this is where you can get your parts, is that something that can also come easily, or is that where people will also be tripped up and trying to figure out how to fix a particular item?
That's right. So that is another area where the information is not as readily available as one would think, and so in that manufacturers are saying, well, we don't want to have consumers be able to have access to this information because we're scared of what they're going to do with their stuff. And so you have an organization called iFixit, where the CEO there, his name is Kyle Wiens, and he said, he's basically said, that's ridiculous, and we're going to do this ourselves. And so, his organization and his community has attempted to try to do exactly that, is, take apart stuff and figure out how to repair it on their own to then release it to others to be able to do that.
On the flip side, Leah, before we head to break, does that also impact when we think about the ideas behind intellectual property, allowing people to, again, create and innovate and then have the ability to make money off of their inventions? But if all of that is publicly available, what's in it for somebody to want to create a product if it's not something that they can continue to make money off of?
Sure, right. So we're not talking about limiting the intellect. So the right to repair movement is not talking about limiting any initial intellectual property rights or protections. It's talking about allowing consumers access. So so the manufacturers are making money by selling their products, and they're selling it at a premium because they have the intellectual property protections on that product. After they've sold it, though, that's what we're talking about. So we're talking about the consumers being and post-consumers being able to sell that product to other people, to fix it, to have it last longer, to pass it down, not to be, basically manipulated into purchasing newer products all the time to support sort of an inflated bottom line that the companies have.
My guest today, Leah Chan Greenwald, Associate Dean and Professor of Law at Suffolk University School of Law in Boston, where she specializes in intellectual property law. This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. After the break, we're going to talk about more about the right to repair movement, including laws affecting items you own, like cars. Now, do you take your car to an independent auto shop or a dealership? What information do mechanics have access to, and should that information be expanded? You can join our conversation, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. We're learning about the right to repair movement as technology takes over more and more of the everyday items we use, from smartphones to coffee makers to cars. My guest today, Leah Chan Greenwald, Associate Dean and Professor of Law at Suffolk University in Boston. Leah, I wanted to ask, before we talk more about the automotive industry, your state in Massachusetts has a right to repair law that relates to cars and the people who fix them. Can you just briefly update us on why that law came to be?
Yeah, sure. So in 2012, the Massachusetts voters actually voted into law the right to repair your car law, and that only focuses on cars in the state of Massachusetts, and requires that manufacturers provide the same types of information and access to diagnostic information about cars that they do to their authorized dealers, so that consumers in Massachusetts have the right to choose where they get their car fixed, right? Do you go to the dealer, like you've been asking, do you go to the dealer, or do you get to go to the independent repair shop that maybe is down the street, maybe you know the person, right? Maybe they're your neighbor, and you trust them. And so that was in 2012. It was a ballot initiative in Massachusetts. Based on that, that actually pushed the car industry to enter into a memorandum of understanding, a nationwide memorandum of understanding that basically allows the same rights across the country to in other states. And so other states didn't have to pass a law similar to Massachusetts, and that's actually what the right to repair movement wanted. And now the automotive right to repair sort of wing has come back and has been lobbying for a new law to update the 2012 law.
Mm-hmm. And why is that? Because technology continues to change?
That's correct. Exactly. Okay. Technology in the cars has changed dramatically. So, information, diagnostic information about your car that are called telematics, which sort of attaches or connects the GPS to all of how your car is working, the speed of your car, what your car is doing when you're going at that speed. All of that data is now in the newer cars transmitted wirelessly, and so there are new systems that the independent repair shops are saying that they're not getting access to. So the lobby has come back and said we need to update this law. They haven't had any success in the legislative process, and so what they're going to do is attempt to go for another ballot initiative for 2020.
Again, we've been talking about this proposal in the state of Massachusetts. We wanted to get some Connecticut perspective. So joining our conversation now is Bob Amendola, who is president of Auto Body Association of Connecticut and also owner of Auto Works of Westville. Bob, welcome to our show.
Yes, hi, thank you.
Just briefly, we've been learning about the right to repair movement, and we heard a bit from Leah about Massachusetts' right to repair law that affects the automotive industry. As someone who owns a shop in Connecticut, can you talk about your thoughts on right to repair and what information independent car shops should have when trying to fix someone's car?
Absolutely. The automotive industry is changing at a rate that we've never seen before. And exactly what what was being said about telematics and ADAS systems, LiDAR, sonar. It's amazing. And the amount of automotive fatalities worldwide is an absolutely staggering number. And the manufacturers are addressing this, which is wonderful, to make safer vehicles. And things are changing at an incredible speed, as I had said. The importance of having access to this information is crucial in fixing these cars. Shops, we're losing a vast number of shops in the United States, collision repair shops. In Connecticut, over 10 years ago, we had over 1,000 shops. Today, collision repairers are less than, or approximately 400 in strength. Most dealerships do not even have their own collision repair shops. Some do, but most do not because it's so specialized. The thing that is happening is the first thing that we do before we touch a car is we have to pre-scan this car to see where the electronics and where the systems are and what is damaged or what is inoperable. Then we address that. And we've been scanning cars at our shop for over 8 years, and I have to tell you, the battle was incredible with the collision carriers. They didn't want to acknowledge it. They didn't want to pay for it. They didn't want to address it. We had to go to the manufacturers and have them put out their own position statements, which most manufacturers were very good about doing that because we're dealing with people's safety. And they then, at that point in time, the insurance companies could no longer dispute this. So that was a big step. So what has happened is they've recognized it. But now some of the information that we need, there is automotive one-stop that we can go to these and look up this repair procedure research that what needs to be done on every car. And there is a cost associated with that, and we're finding a big pushback on that as well.
So I'm sorry, Bob, so explain that a little bit more. So is there particular software that your shop needs to get particular information from a car manufacturer of how to fix something if it's not working?
True, absolutely. We have to research that data on where panel placement can be changed and the types of spot welds that are supposed to be used and the types of MIG wire that are required for the various different metals and aluminums that are coming into play. The one thing that our association has been looking into is manufacturers, in one respect, are trying to help educate the industry by having certified programs. And the certified programs, it's a double-bladed sword because there are good things about it, but there are also bad things about it. And this is where it hinges in on this, right to repair. The information we feel should any manufacturer that is building vehicles, cell phones, whatever intellectual property that they have designed, absolutely they are entitled to sell their product at a value point that they find the consumer wants and be successful. But once they put that out there, like what your program has discussed, it's so important that these items can be serviced, and we don't want to have monopolies. We want to have free trade in this country, and with guarding that information, it inhibits that. And I commend Massachusetts for taking this lead. It was a wonderful thing. But getting back to the point of is that certain manufacturers won't sell parts to repairers unless they're certified, and part of being certified is paying into their program. So on one count, the information and the education is paramount, and we do our own research and we do our own training in our shops and keep our technicians abreast on what they need, and when they're repairing a car, they'll get a sheet of what they need, and it just doesn't go out to them. It goes out to them with an explanation so that they fully understand it. And what's happening is the trades are nationally lacking in the staff. So there's a big resurgence for these trades. These people that are working on cars properly are becoming at the level of aircraft mechanics. And yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, Bob, we thank you for giving us a call. Bob Amendola, president of Auto Body Association up in Connecticut, also owner of Auto Works of Westville, as we talk more about the right to repair movement. I should mention that there are no current bills before the Connecticut General Assembly that's looking at right to repair related to the automotive industry in Connecticut, unlike what's happening in Massachusetts. But we wanted to get also a different perspective on this issue. Jim Fleming's with us, president of the Connecticut Automotive Retailers Association, which represents new car dealers in Connecticut. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
And so you've been following the Massachusetts Right to Repair movement, and as we heard from my other guest, Leah Chan Greenwald, there's now emphasis on trying to expand that right to repair law to allow mechanics access to what's called telematics, so more of that digital information coming from cars. What's your take? Is this something that needs to happen?
Well, I think it's very important to draw a distinction between the right to repair movement for automobiles and other consumer products such as computers. Automobile right to repair is already available either in law, which you have in Massachusetts, or by practice of the OEMs. And I listened to Bob and I listened to Leah, and all of the information that is necessary to repair a vehicle is presently available to independent repair shops, to dealer repair shops, and consumers themselves can get access to whatever information they need to repair these vehicles. That may not be the case with such things as computers and TVs and iPhones and so forth. So it's important to draw that distinction. In Massachusetts, for example, I know that 70% of all of the post-warranty repairs are done by independent repair shops. So they're already doing this. So when you talk about right to repair, I think you have to draw a distinction between the automotive industry and other industries that are out there. And the digital right to repair effort, I think, brings in many, many more complications than what I would consider to be the right to repair, which is already in place in the automotive industry.
So, Jim, as we hear more about technology taking over our cars, thinking to cars that will be assembled, past 2022, and this idea of them being more digital. So, what does that mean for the consumer and where that information goes?
Well, the cars will get more complicated. Certainly the safety features in cars and trucks now are amazing. They protect lives, which is what we all want to see happen. We want to make sure these vehicles are operating properly. And information that's necessary to make repairs to those systems will still be available in 2020 or 2025. What's being asked for under the digital right to repair is access to, by third parties, to real-time consumer data. So, I'm the former commissioner of consumer protection for the state of Connecticut. I have real concerns about why any third party needs to have access to that information. It is not necessary to repair a vehicle. For example, if we were to do that, a mechanic in this country or someone else would actually have the ability to turn your car off and on. I don't think that consumers want that. I don't think it's good for the industry. So the difference between digital right to repair and right to repair, I think you have to draw that distinction.
Well, I want to thank Jim Fleming for joining us, president of the Connecticut Automotive Retailers Association, which again represents new car dealers in Connecticut. I wanted to bring back into the conversation Leah Chan Greenwald here on Where We Live. She's Associate Dean and Professor of Law at Suffolk University in Boston. Leah, what's your take with what Jim is saying about there being differences as we move forward?
Absolutely. I think that the way it's been the lines have been drawn have been to separate the automotive right to repair on both sides want to be separated from the digital or consumer products right to repair movement because they're just different interests involved. And I agree that the products and what the capacity for people are different. From my perspective, though, and I come from it at a sort of an academic law professor perspective, the intellectual property, the laws are the same, and at the end of the day, from my perspective, the consumer is the same, right? Where I own my car, or I lease it. Actually, I don't really own it, and I want to get it repaired just the same way as I want to get my phone repaired. So I don't know. I think the industries have definitely drawn their lines, but I'm not sure it matters so much to the consumer.
Mm-hmm. Except for if the dealer is the only place that you can take your car to be repaired, right. The costs are much greater at times.
Absolutely, exactly.
Again, my guest, Leah Chan Greenwald, Associate Dean and Professor of Law at Suffolk University in Boston, as we learn more about the right to repair movement. Coming up, we want to expand our conversation to something else many of us have today, and that's smartphones. You can join us, too. The number 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to bring you NPR special coverage as the impeachment inquiry public hearings continues. But we'll be back on Monday with a new episode looking back on 30 years of the Judy Dorham Performance Project. We hope you join us for that as well. Now, before we talk more about the information consumers should be able to access when they purchase products like smartphones, we should stress there's another reason some people support this right to repair movement, and that's because it eliminates waste piling up in landfills. We're going to tweet out some information at Where We Live about some Connecticut towns who operate repair cafes. It's a really cool idea, and we wanted to let you know about that. Now, something many of us can't live without are our cell phones. And when they break, who do you turn to? You can join our conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. My guest from studios at WBUR in Boston, Leah Chan Greenwald, Associate Dean and Professor of Law at Suffolk University in Boston. And joining us now by phone is Beth Drake, who's co-owner of Off the Hook Cell Phone and Device Repair in Middletown, Connecticut. Beth, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
So how long has your business been open?
We've been open close to 2 years.
You said 2 years?
2 years, yep.
And so tell us about the people that come into your shop. Are they people who may hold on to their phone as long as they can? Or they're just thinking that maybe they can save some money if they're not going to a brand name store to fix something like a cracked screen?
We have a mixture of both, actually.
So tell us.
We have people coming in looking for repairs because they think it's a way to maintain, hold on to the expensive smartphone that they've already purchased, hoping that'll be a relatively inexpensive fix, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not, unfortunately. So we also have people looking to trade in their phones, thinking that might be an option. We also have a mix of people who need to repair their phone before they can trade it in. Mm-hmm. So we have a mixture of all different types of customers looking for different needs.
So you run an independent repair shop. So can you talk about, have you run into issues with particular phone companies' intellectual property claims when you're trying to repair someone's phone? Can you describe some of those challenges?
The problem we would run into with certain types of phones is obtaining the schematics for those phones to find out exactly what would need to repair if there was soldering and micro soldering involved. So that's right now the biggest opposition that we have is having access to smartphone and computer schematics that would aid us in those types of repairs.
What about particular parts?
Particular parts, we're an independent repair shop, So we're not certified by either Samsung or Apple or any of the main manufacturers. So basically what we do is we buy what's referred to as aftermarket parts. Basically, they're built exactly the same way as the original parts, but they don't carry the manufacturer's stamp of approval on them.
Mm. And
so we're not allowed to purchase actual manufacturer parts.
Mm. And then does that impact, because you're able to get these other particular parts, is it cheaper for the customer in the long run?
It is less expensive for the customer in the long run, yes. But, most customers come in saying, I want, for an Apple phone, I want an OEM screen. We tell them the price of the OEM screen, and then they say, okay, I'm okay with aftermarket. So there is a big price difference with the OEM. The OEM for us is original manufacturer repaired. So basically we can take an iPhone screen, and if it's only the digitizer that's broken, we can put a new digitizer on it, and technically it's an OEM part. It's now still an Apple part because it has an Apple display on it.
Well, thank you, Beth, for your perspective. Again, Beth Drake, co-owner of Off the Hook Cell Phone and Device Repair in Middletown, Connecticut. I wanted to turn back to my guest, Leah Chan Greenwald, Associate Dean and Professor of Law at Suffolk University in Boston. Can you talk more, Leah, about how big tech companies like Apple try to enforce their intellectual property rights claims when it comes to shops like Beth's, where they're just trying to fix people's phones, but it might be harder to do without these schematics, as she mentioned?
Right. And you just heard Beth talk about the lack of access to schematics information as well as parts, the original parts. And so, Apple does have the right to, under our intellectual property laws, they do have a right to protect their intellectual property. What they have been doing, though, is just not making, available the information, and even with the parts, you heard Beth say that she can use aftermarket parts. I was happy to hear that she hasn't been caught up in any of the customs issues in the importation issues that some other repair shops have been caught up in. And so you'll see in the news every now and then when somebody actually tries to import in these aftermarket parts, that they're seized at the border by customs, and the manufacturers, Apple, Microsoft, claim that they are counterfeit products. And then importers like Beth's store, small businesses, need to then wrangle with this complicated system and prove, basically, the burden is on them to prove that the parts are not counterfeit. And so, it's kind of hard to prove a negative. And so, I was happy to hear Beth hasn't been caught up in that, but that is something that other repair shops around the country have been facing. And in addition, sometimes the other parts are not as good necessarily in that, so the consumer is really left with this, what should I do? I need to use my phone. The smartphone these days, access to the internet and everything is becoming essential, as you mentioned, not just as our obsession, but almost essential to doing jobs like, working for Amazon, even doing the deliveries. If you don't have a smartphone and the smartphone is not working or the camera's not working, or you can't, the screen, you can't work there because you need that phone.
I'm wondering, Leah, when we hear about these tactics from big tech companies, in one sense it might help brand loyalty, right? If people think that the only place to fix their phone is to go to the Apple store, because then you get people who've been trained specifically and have access to all of these different parts. But does that also work against companies like Apple, or is it being shown that consumers are getting frustrated with this and looking for other options and thinking about companies that might be more apt to make these parts accessible and not as expensive, that might actually build brand loyalty?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And this is definitely something, that we talk about in, branding and consumer psychology, sort of at what's the tipping point, right? Between that loyal, sort of consumer versus the frustrated, angry consumer that walks away from the product. And that's definitely something that you have been seeing. And I think the telephone market just kind of shows that. Apple used to have, such a hold over the smartphone market market. And it wasn't just because they were the first mover, but because they were offering this product and allowed for repairs. So repairs, I should mention, and I think I haven't done so yet, but that this has all been recent because repairs actually used to be able to be done by independent. Why were all these repair cafes started was because all the information and all of the parts had been available. And it's only been in the last, I would say, seven or so years that the manufacturers have been sort of locking down more on the repair market because it's become big business for them. And so you do see, the loyal consumers trying to go into the Apple Store and then being told, the sales folks, and I'm not, I don't want to place any blame on anybody, but even the service people becoming salespeople saying, hey, well, we could fix your phone, but it would cost $300 to fix it. And so why don't you just upgrade to a new phone? It only will cost you a few hundred more. And so, a loyal consumer who really wants, the product to be touched by, only the manufacturer is really in a bind. And so, particularly for those who don't have that extra few $100s, what do? And then actually something I've just been learning about more recently, there was a story out from the Washington Post today or yesterday about privacy issues where even if you send your phone in to the original manufacturer like Apple, some of their, employees might not be respecting your privacy and downloading your pictures and things like that. So that's sort of another issue. I don't want to digress us too much, but that's another issue too.
I should mention we did reach out to Apple. We got a statement. Part of it reads, we believe the safest and most reliable repair is one handled by a trained technician using genuine parts that have been properly engineered and rigorously tested. So we have talked about their claims about that being best for the product's lifespan. But again, it doesn't help you oftentimes in the pocketbook. Before we let you go, Leah, this was a really interesting conversation. This has been discussed on the presidential campaign trail, specifically some candidates looking at how this is impacting farmers. Can you briefly tell us about that?
Yeah, so the Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have both come out in favor of right to repair, looking specifically at farmers because farmers and their equipment, their very complicated tractors are all run by software. And so they have trouble actually fixing their equipment. And so the movement, this repair movement is really just, the support for it is broad spread, and there's so many different constituencies involved, farmers being sort of an unlikely sector because they are just so frustrated. When they're in the middle of harvest season and their equipment breaks down, then sometimes the nearest authorized repair center is miles away. And so how are they going to get their equipment over there back in time, fixed back in time for harvesting? They just want to be able to do it themselves on their own farm. And so I think that's kind of why, obviously, and you can hear that that's a sympathetic story, and one that impacts the larger society, right? Mm-hmm. If the farmer's not able to harvest, then that means we don't have the food at a reasonable price across the country, right? Mm-hmm. So they've included that. But the hope, I hope, and I think others in the movement hope that will then, if something can be done nationally in Congress for the farmers, that it would then maybe extend to other sectors.
And meanwhile, we should mention that there are states, I think more than 20, that have looked at proposals for right to repair. You have done research along with colleagues about how to reconcile intellectual property owners with the rights of consumers. We're going to actually tweet out a link to that research that you've done, Leah, so that our listeners can learn more. Well, we want to thank you for joining us today for, again, a really interesting conversation, just scratching the surface on this. But Leah Chan Greenwald, Associate Dean and Professor of Law at Suffolk University in Boston, joining us today from WBUR Studios in Boston. We hope to have you back, Leah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy.
Today's show produced by Carmen Baskoff. Thanks to Kevin Morrison on the phones today. Also did some great man-on-the-street interviews for our show about right to repair. Our technical producer is Kyone Wolf. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Learn more about our show. Just download Where We Live on your favorite podcast app. And as always, thanks for listening.